Mega Man Zero, my version. I have to say that the Zero redesign we got in the Megaman Zero games is not horrible, but there are a number of reasons as to why I overall don't care for it compared to what came before. I don't mean to disrespect the person who came up with this Zero redesign, but I don't think this was really needed. This redesign goes against my rule of thumb of not drastically change something if it doesn't really need it, cause well, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. The size of this Zero also seems to be a bit smaller compared to his X-series body, which is not the worst offender, but I don't see it as a step up either. What is a more significant step down, however, is how this Zero doesn't seem to have propellers in his feet to do the dash, so I don't know how does he dash in the Zero games. And more importantly, he can no longer do an air dash. You can, however, do a double jump while dashing in the air, but you have to unlock or search for what you need to get the double jump in most of the games. He also doesn't seem to have a built-in buster either, but I'll say more on that in a moment. I want this Zero to not be too different from the one that I knew in the X series, and if X was playable, I would be saying the same thing. And actually, I think it's just that I don't care for the art style of the Zero games. There was no need for a new art style, if you ask me. Not to mention this is the only series they seemingly did this. The art style on the Megaman Battle Network and Legends series doesn't look that different from the one used on the Classic and X series, but anyway. Later in the games, Zero can hang on ropes, but unlike Megaman X5, he cannot move left or right while hanging on the rope. It once again feels like a step down from what came before, but I'm not sure if the redesign is to blame for this one. The only redesigned things I would keep is the white pocket on his leg, the muscles on the extremities of the body, the new hairstyle, and the new saber design. It would be an upgraded version of his mighty trusty saber, but more solid. I also want to mention that I actually grew up with the Megaman Zero design when I first saw anything related to Zero as a whole. While I didn't know what a Game Boy Advance was, that didn't stop me from playing Megaman Zero via Flash games. From what I remember, the games that tried to replicate the gameplay of the GBA games were very fun. However, not even that nostalgia stopped me from liking Zero's design in the Megaman X games more. I guess it's also because this Zero design is tied to the Megaman vs Zero Cataclysm theory from the classic era, since we do know he also looks similar there compared to the X series, but enough of that. My Zero would be more like X1 Zero, which would be not as good as having his X2 body, but the reason for that would be story based. He has a copy of his X1 body because there was no way to give him a body reminiscent to his X2 body, since information of his X2 body and how it works would have mysteriously disappear, but the schematics of his X1 body would still be out there. A certain someone would say that our Zero is just a quote, unfinished inferior copy of the real deal, but this Zero doesn't need the best body out there to still be able to have decent fighting skills. Zero would have a Z in his forehead. Why is that? Because it would symbolize that he is Zero, because he chooses to fight for those who don't have the ability to defend themselves. He is someone who can do his own thing now, while not having to worry about viruses or a mad scientist trying to make him evil. As for his X2 body, I would obviously give that to Omega, who is the quote, real and original Zero. I would also give this X to Sprite, to those 03 Omega hacks out there. One of the reasons I don't care for his redesign is not only because it's a bit too different, which is ironic, because that is what the devs of Megaman X1 tried to avoid by making X, but also because he doesn't even seem to have his Zero Buster anymore. In my version, he would definitely have his good old Zero Buster. And I know some people might say that the reason he uses a gun he took from a resistance member is to honor those who died trying to find him because they needed him, which is similar to what X does in Megaman X6 by using Zero's saber. Well, I think I have an easy solution for that, to have the best of both worlds. In Zero 1, he would start by not using his Zero Buster, but rather the gun from a fallen resistance member. Why, you may ask? Well, because at first Zero wouldn't know he has a built-in buster, nor would he remember how to activate it. So for the time being, He would use a gun that YouTube influencers mistakenly call the Zero Buster, by the way. But here is a cooler thing that could be done by him having the gun and his Zero Buster. Later on in the game, he would eventually relearn how to use his Zero Buster with the level up skill system, but he would not ditch the gun entirely. Instead, he would use the gun combined with his Buster to have a double charged shot attack similar to what he does in Megaman X3. Some people might say, why wouldn't just use his two busters instead? Well, because as far as I know, his X1 body never had two busters, so this would be a great way to compensate while keeping the gun to one of those fallen resistance members. However, I think something like that would have to be hacked into the games, since at no point in the games you can shoot two charged shots simultaneously. And also, not only I would want to implement the X1 sprite scene in that 03 hack, but I would also apply that patch that makes the game less ridiculous with all the grinding you have to do to get everything in 01. Story wise, this Zero would be more flirty with girls that he knows are into him. Now you may be wondering, why would I do something like that? Well, because I think it would be best to give them what they want before he or they are gone forever. Now don't get it wrong, this Zero wouldn't necessarily love seducing girls, he would only give them almost anything they want out of kindness. But of course, you would never see it, you would only see stuff that implies he did something intimate with them. I think in this part, I'm gonna be talking about some miscellaneous stuff. Some people still wonder if Zero can be considered a Megaman, but I think he is, especially if he is essentially endorsed by Megaman X himself. Speaking of X, I think I would make him look like how he does in Megaman X Command Mission, since someone made a Command Mission X sprite for 03 many years ago. One thing I have seen influencers on YouTube say is that the control on the Megaman Zero games feels more responsive than the Megaman X games, and therefore they are better. This is not entirely true. You see, in the Megaman X games for the PS1, if you hold the dash button all the time, you can do dash jumps as soon as you jump, rather than having to dash first. Unfortunately, that is a seeming oversight that Inti creates, and with the controls. Because of that, I wouldn't say the controls in the Zero games are better. Dash jumping just by holding the button felt great, and I'm sure speedrunners would agree with me on this. The other reason I don't consider the controls in the Zero games to be better is because once again, X5 had something that none of the Zero games have, the ability to dock. It's not a huge deal, but it could be seen as a step down by some. One thing I hear often is that most people don't like the names of the Mavericks in the Zero games. Personally, I don't mind the names, but just like the Mavericks themselves, most of them are not that interesting story-wise. These Mavericks don't even have an intro sequence, but for some reason it's okay to give them a death sequence that lasts 7 seconds when you defeat them, in addition to some dialogue that I don't care about reading. And some lusty rusty justy guy out there loves to complain about a boss rush, but yet, he never said anything about what I just mentioned. No, not that Justin. Anyway, the reason I don't care about what the Mavericks say is because most of them are boring Mavericks that serve Dr. Weil or any of the other evil main antagonist, so I have no incentive to care about their dialogue most of the time if I know they will serve the bad guy no matter what. That would be like asking me to care about what a biased simple hater says. Not to mention they're not that different from Mavericks from the Mega Man X games. I want to address the whole Maverick name thing though. The reason why you may find the names weird or stupid is because if you play Mega Man X, you got used to the altered localized names for the Mavericks that would often be elemental or weapon thing and animal name. You see, that was not how it was in the Japanese releases of the Rockman X games. The names of the Mavericks were almost completely different. They were often a mixture of English words mixed with another one, or mixed with Japanese words, or sometimes the mixed English word sounding similar to a Japanese sentence. The only game that didn't use this was Mega Man X5, which is ironic, because in the US, they changed the names to make references to names from the Bang Guns and Roses. I think that was the only time when they did something similar to what the Japanese releases did for the Maverick names. I bring this up because for the Megaman Zero series, they didn't bother to simplify the names, like they did with most of the Megaman X games. With the exception of Hellbat Shell, and maybe others, most of the Maverick names were not altered. And just like the Megaman X games in Japan, they continued to be a mixture of a word with another one. Although in this case, the mixture seems to be of an elemental or animal word, while trying to make it a name-like word. They did, however, altered the name of Dr. Weil. I'm sure this is common knowledge for any Megaman geek, but in Japan, he is known as Dr. Weil. This is one of those cases where I actually prefer the localized name, just like how I prefer Sunstar over Sun God. In fact, if you pronounce Weil in German, it might actually sound just like his name in Japan, Weil, in addition to also fit with the design of the antagonist of the classic series being clearly inspired by Albert Einstein. It is a better name, since W has more of an impact in the games, pretty much representing the evil entity that causes most of the bad stuff in the Megaman series. W deserves every single booing from those Megaman concerts in real life. Something I have seen recently is that there is people out there making hacks for Megaman 0, 3 and 4. Most of them seem to be people from Japan, but while they do look cool, most of them have not been released in any way. This sucks because if the creator decides to not release what they made for any reason, you essentially gave everybody hopes that something good was coming, just to basically cancel it like those unreleased Megaman games from the early 2010s. In particular, there was something like this that happened recently, where someone who was making a hack for Megaman 04 all of a sudden said he won't continue the project, nor will he release what he made so far. I asked if he could at least share what he used to change the Zero sprite, and at first I thought I wasn't going to get any response, but he eventually did respond. He told me to use Tile Layer Pro. I did use that program before, but I didn't know that it was compatible with Game Boy Advance games. I might use that and see if I can put the sprite I want in all Zero games. I would also like to see if I can replace the Zero graphics from the cutscenes. Also, I wonder if you could do that for the Megaman Zero collection for the Nintendo DS, but the only hack I saw was one that makes the games use the wider aspect ratio of the DS screen. Back in 2010, I thought the games were remade from scratch for the Nintendo DS while using the wider aspect ratio, but sadly they didn't, but I digress. Anyway, it's a shame that Third didn't release anything. I actually would have loved to have Zero's voice clips from the PS1 games on the Zero games as well. And now, I just hope that the user D doesn't do the same that Third did and suddenly announce he won't release anything. Also, I just don't know what route is he trying to take his 03 hack in. I think I would have released at least that X4 based Zero and his sprite, along with the harder Omega fight, since that's what I liked the most, but that's that. Here is a bit of a bonus. I think this sprite should also be implemented in Megaman ZX, since you can technically play as Omega in that game, but you have to find Omega, beat him, and then do a couple more things, and you'll get Model O. It's essentially the closest you can get to a Megaman 05. I think this Omega sprite would be great to have on here, but I don't know how easy it would be to do that, since I haven't seen any real hacks of the Megaman ZX games. However, if the DS Castlevania games have cool character hacks, then I don't think it's impossible to at least make a sprite hack for Megaman ZX, or the sequel, by replacing Vent or Rail's sprite with Zero. It would also be nice to have hacks that fix the flaws of the game, like the not so great map. I almost forgot to add that I wish the Megaman Zero games had a boss rush mode that lets you fight all of the bosses in the games, kinda like what the Megaman ZX games have. I think there was more I wanted to say, but I'll leave it here for now, since I have other videos I have to make, like a video about Derek Savage versus the YouTuber I Hate Everything, a decade later. See you all again, and just like Clement said, rock on with your ponytails. I'm certainly rocking on with my red one, whenever I hear the Zero vs Omega song.